This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by The Collective at TheQuollellective. The Collective is a bold, independent media hub committed to truth, justice, and calling fascism what it is. While other outlets bend the knee to Christian nationalism and corporate dollars, The Collective stands tall, queer, loud, and unbought. And you can find my articles there as well. Right now, you can get 20% off a yearly subscription using our exclusive promo code UNBELIEF. That's UNBELIEF. Unbelief. You're going to get 20% off when you go to The Collective, hit the subscribe button, and put in the discount code UNBELIEF. If you're looking for the site, it's TheQuollellective.com. That's TheQuollellective.com. The Collective and our promo code UNBELIEF. I think you're really going to love it there. Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? You've made it to another book club episode of the Unbelief Podcast, and we are continuing to process different stories that Jesus told and look at them from a different lens, a lens that understands their cultural background, but also a lens that helps us become the best version of ourselves. And so what we are going to do is we're going to start by actually reading this parable in its entirety from the New Revised Standard Updated Edition. It's from the book of Matthew, chapter 13. And in the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, again, the book of Matthew, chapter 13, and we are looking at it starting, it's in verse 24. So here's what it says. It says, he put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed a good seed in a field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among them. So the wheat then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seeds in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, no, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Okay, so this is an interesting parable, and this parable begins, it says, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to. And this beginning phrase, the kingdom of heaven, it starts with that. And it's important because sometimes like you will read that the kingdom of heaven is going to be compared to, and you sort of brush over that. You sort of skirt over that just a little bit so that you can get to, the good stuff, like what you think is the most important thing. But that beginning actually, the beginning of that actually has a really important role to play in characterizing what the parable is actually talking about. And this idea of the kingdom of heaven, that's a really interesting idea in the teachings of Jesus, because in the ancient world, that meant something already, right? When you and I think about the kingdom of heaven in the modern world, we might be tempted to assume that means like heaven, like a place where God dwells, or maybe heaven, the place where you want to go when you die, or something like that. However, in the ancient world, the kingdom of heaven was not that at all. And so it's important for us to keep in mind what that was. Oh, the other thing that you might think is, if you're being a little bit more metaphorical, the kingdom of heaven is the people that will get to go to heaven, right? Heaven is our modern view of heaven is pretty problematic. When we talk about finding that in the Bible, it's kind of like hell. There is a lot that has been said about heaven and taught about heaven. That's not really in the Bible, but there's lots of traditions around it. Anyway, yes, heaven is, in our modern conception, is kind of problematic when it comes to the Bible. But this idea of the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of heaven sort of coming, it was this revolution. It was this upending of the order of things. And when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven, it's political, it's social, it's spiritual, and it's a whole other politic, a whole other way of thinking about society, a whole other way of thinking about spirituality. And all of that, in that moment, in the ancient Near Eastern world, in the first century, it was something that was supposed to be in contrast to Rome's sort of violent, oppressive, peace through strength kind of place, kind of empire. This idea is that God is going to reclaim the world from oppression, injustice, that God is going to be restoring peace and fairness to society. It's starting like in right here and now, not in some distant future, not in some moment when we all go to heaven, like we all go up into the sky and everything's perfect then. No. The kingdom of heaven is supposed to be God doing that right now. It's a present reality, as well as something going on in the future. But when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven can be compared to, this is this idea of what people were longing for. And I'll be honest, if I think of what I'm longing for, like in the deepest part of me, an upending of the current political and social and spiritual culture in a way that sort of reclaims it from oppression, that restores peace and fairness. I don't think it's something just that people were longing for in the first century. I think it's something that people are longing for all the time, a thing that people hope for and desire at their core. Yeah, I know I do. Like when I read the news, I'm longing for what people understood when they heard Jesus say the kingdom of heaven. The right way things are supposed to be. Like, that's what I'm longing for. So the parable, that's like the preamble to the parable. The kingdom of heaven can be compared to, and what it says that the kingdom of heaven can be compared to is someone who sowed good seed in his field. So again, ancient cultures are different than our modern culture. And that means that sometimes there are things that we don't understand because they're just different. And this is one of those moments. Agriculture in this part of the world at this time was different than the way we practice agriculture today, the way we grow our food today. Most of the time when we grow our food today, it's one person that owns a big plot of land, or maybe one company that owns a big plot of land, or multiple giant plots of land. They're sowing the seed. They're doing the same sowing of the seeds, right? Obviously with very different mechanisms for doing that. But that is not the way it happened in the ancient world. Communities in the ancient world planted together. Sometimes they actually shared the plots of land, right? Multiple families would be planting together. And the community was planting often next to each other, plots that were next to each other. So when it says here that an enemy went and sowed bad seeds, sowed weeds into the field, it wasn't just attack on one person. This was something that would affect multiple people and likely the whole community, right? So this was an attack that was bigger than just one person. It wasn't like that somebody ticked somebody off and like that person was trying. It's bigger than that. Yeah. Community wide. It's all of the people. And so when this happened, it's just, it can be devastating to a whole community. And then it's this interesting seed. There's a guy named Kenneth Bailey. And look, I'm going to be honest. I think a lot of people do stuff with parables where they go way into too much detail and extrapolate all kinds of meanings from minutia that's not ultimately valuable or meaningful to the parable. But I think this scholar, Kenneth Bailey, his insight actually is something that can be a little bit helpful to us. And that is that he says, I might get this wrong, exactly how to pronounce it. He says that the seed that's mentioned here is a seed for a plant called zizania. I think that's right. Yeah, zizania or zizania. And what he says is that this seed, it's particularly poignant to the parable because this seed, when it sprouts, it looks very much like wheat. And so when the seeds sprout, when the wheat and the weeds sprout next to each other, it's going to be really hard to understand which seed is which. And so that's why he says, like, if you pull them up, it's going to damage the plants, and you're not going to be able to tell. You're not going to be able to tell which one is which, right? You're gonna pull up some of the good wheat, and you're gonna pull up some of the. You're gonna think you're pulling up wheat when you're pulling up wheat, and you're gonna think you're pulling up. It's a mess. Like this is a particularly bad mess. And so it says that the person who's planting, the farmer, decides to just let them grow up together, right? Because when this seed grows up, it's obviously a weed. It doesn't look like wheat forever. Eventually, at the end of all of this, the farmer will be able to, or the harvesters will be able to tell the difference between these two types of plants. Whereas right here at the beginning, it's hard. It's hard to figure out like what's going on, what's the good stuff and what's the bad stuff. This parable consolidates so much of the human experience into this one image. And that is that, well, people love to judge other people right away. So the metaphor is that these seeds, these weeds, and the wheat, that's people, and God is sort of the farmer. And we love to judge quickly. In fact, we're actually wired that way. Like it's good. It's helpful to be able to size up a situation pretty quickly and to be able to walk in and be like, I'm not safe here. Right? Or talk to a person and be like, ooh, there's something that's kind of creeping me out about this person. Right? There's all these different, I don't know, just really helpful things about being able to judge quickly. And yet, we all know that sometimes you judge somebody. There's that adage, you can't judge a book by its cover, that the first impression might not be right all the time. Yeah. And so this thing that is really helpful to us, and like, it's like evolutionarily helpful. Like it's helpful at a really deep level. Can also be very unhelpful when it comes to relationships, when it comes to people, especially because a lot of times when we size somebody up, we size them up in an instant, in a particular setting, at a particular moment in time. And some people, when they're surrounded by the right people or the wrong people, they just give off a different vibe. And you can be around somebody and be like, oh man, I like this person. They're really cool. They're so much fun. And then you go to another setting with them and you're like, whoa, actually they're kind of awful. I don't like them. Like I like them in the work setting, but man, when we hung out socially, that was awful. I could never be, I thought I was going to be friends. I could never be their friend. They'll be a good colleague, but man, that's awful. We've experienced that, right? We've experienced when our impression of somebody, it's not great. We've experienced people doing that to us. People judging us because at work we're maybe hard charging, successful, whatever. But then in the rest of our life, we're pretty laid back, right? Like that happens. That happens all the time for us. And so it's really like this idea that immediately we're going to judge the wheat from the weeds. Like sometimes they can look the same, right? Yeah. And the other thing is, we aren't the same forever, right? I mean, I know that for me, I have moments when I look back in my life and I'd be like, oh yeah, I was really solid then. I was a good friend. I was a good neighbor. I was a good worker. And then I sort of fast forward and I realize, oh geez, for a couple of years there, I just fell off the edge of the earth. I was not a good friend. I was not a good family member. Like I was no good during that time. And then fast forward a little bit more and I'm like, oh yes, but I got my life back on track. It was a great moment. There was another several years of being in a good place and being the person I want to be. And that's the thing, right? We experience that ourselves, that we are just not the same person from day to day, from week to week, from year to year. Like things change we change. And as we change, sometimes we become better. Sometimes we become worse. Sometimes we start looking more like the wheat. And sometimes we look more like the weeds. Yeah. And so one of the things this parable says is like, you got to be patient with the world. You've got to be patient with people. You've got to be patient with yourself. To not judge yourself. Like, I am right now who I will be forever. My life is getting worse and worse. I am getting worse and worse at work. And I'm just going to keep this downhill slide. That's not it. That's not it. You're not the same forever. You need to have patience with yourself. And patience with yourself, knowing that there are times when you have been in good times and bad times. You've been better and worse as a person, as a human. You got to be patient with yourself. And at the same time, not just permissive to do nothing and to never try to become a better version of yourself. No. Just be patient and be like, okay, yeah, I've gotten into a bad spot. I've turned into more of a weed, and I need to start working on that. I need to start moving in a better direction, you know? Yeah. You got to be patient with yourself. But you also need to be patient with other people. And don't get me wrong, I don't mean that you need to let people walk all over you or be horrible to you. I don't mean that at all. What I mean is that you need to give yourself just a little bit of space when you are experiencing another person. Right? Like I remember that I grew up with this person and I did not like them, right? I didn't like them. Like, you know, they weren't my kind of person when I was growing up, and they were kind of mean to me and whatever. And then you turn around and you meet them 10 years later. And I was like, man, this person is really chill. Like, this is the kind of person that I want to hang out with. Like, that I'd love to be my friend if we lived closer to each other. Right? Because, like, it changed. 10 years is a long time. It's a lot of progress, forward or backwards, somebody can make. Discovering things about themselves, right? So being patient with other people is this idea of saying, like, look, you don't have to be around people who are toxic, but don't assume that somebody's going to be toxic for the rest of their lives, right? Just as you can make progress, they can make progress too. You might need to write them off for a little while. Don't get me wrong. You might need to just take a break and be like, no, you are not my people. But then at some point, when you come back around, when they show up, you got to say to yourself, wait a second, I need to not come to this with this fully preconceived idea. I need to pay attention, but maybe they're different. And the other piece is that, you know, sometimes you look at a person and they look really good, but really they're not. Sometimes you look at yourself and you know you're putting on a good face, but you also know what's going on inside you. Yeah. You need some work. You need some healing. So it's important. This parable says to us also, just know you can be fooled. You can think a person is bad when they're not, or a person is good when they're not. And ultimately, this parable sort of says, like, at the end of the day, you got to protect yourself, but don't just judge people forever. The only person that can ultimately judge is God, right? If you believe in God. Yeah, this parable, right? Yeah. I find that one of the things when I am trying to become a better version of myself, right? Trying to improve. One of the best ways to do that is as part of a community. And we have this community called Not Church, where we do just this. We do the parable of the wheat and the weeds all the time, where we are trying to figure out our own spiritual practices and beliefs that work well for us, that help us become the best version of ourselves, find a purpose greater than ourselves, maybe experience transcendence, a connection with the divine, or just transcendence in the sense that we can rise above what's going on in our life. If you are interested in that, I think you'd love it. You can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor, patreon.com/skepticpastor, and it's $3 a month. $3 a month because it's a faith community, but it's a faith community that is full of people who were manipulated out of their money, right? All kinds of religious identities, and we just don't do that. We don't ask people to donate. We just pay for what you get. So yeah, you can do that. Patreon.com/skepticpastor. And if wherever you listen to this podcast, just give it all the ratings and stars and really share it with a friend. Sharing it with a friend is super helpful, and we would really appreciate it. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.